Good afternoon, folks. Welcome back to the program. I just want to give you all a little heads up. We had Paul Hellyer on earlier in the program. He made statements that reflected his beliefs. It is not very profitable for people to disagree with Paul Hellyer and what he had to say with our current guest, Leslie Kean, who is not a true believer and who is not saying that extraterrestrials exist or spacecraft exist, but simply that it is a rational hypothesis given the numbers of unidentified aerial phenomena. And perhaps, Leslie, I should have started out by telling the audience a little bit more about you, and I'm going to do that right now. You became interested in this because you got an exclusive English copy of the Cometa report. It was a white paper, I think, done in France. It piqued your interest. It was full of interesting information. But what it basically was a cry for rational investigation of these unidentified phenomena, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was actually written by a group of military officials, a lot of generals, an admiral, the former head of the space agency in France, you know. And yes, it was a call really for more preparedness, which really means research. I mean, these people were looking at this question as to, whether this might be a national defense concern. National security might be at stake because of these
aviation
issues.
Safety is a factor.
Aviation safety, exactly. And they spent 3 years, these very, very high level, you know, one of them was a 4-star general. They spent 3 years studying official data on the UFO phenomenon. These were retired people, but still very active. They were all part of a government-funded military strategy agency. I mean, they were very active people, but free enough to do what they wanted to do since they were retired. And it was a white paper. It was not an official paper. Yeah. But nonetheless, they did their homework, and they gathered data from all over the world, and they laid out some of the best cases, and they drew the conclusion in that report that we stated at the very beginning, that the extraterrestrial hypothesis needs to be studied. It makes total sense. It fits the data. It's the most logical explanation. But, yes, we need more investigation to really find out if, indeed, that hypothesis can be proven or not. That was the point of their study. Yeah,
and you persuaded the Boston Globe to take a major article from you, the purpose of which was not to convince people that UFOs existed, but to overcome the taboo about even talking about it.
Exactly, and it's really to make the point. When you say about whether UFOs existed, I think the point is that we have to be very clear that we define what a UFO is.
That's right.
In fact, UFOs do exist, but by saying that, we are not saying that alien spacecraft exist, that extraterrestrial extraterrestrial ships are flying around here. The word UFO means unidentified flying object, and actually that term was originated by the U.S. Air Force back in the 50s. So, the problem is that people equate the word UFOs with alien spacecraft. That's why there's laughter about it. That's why people have such strong reactions to it. If they could just simply look at this incredible phenomenon that we have, and it is incredible.
Is it better?
The book is extraordinary. The material it presents is extraordinary, but we don't know what they are. That's the bottom line. And it sort of takes the pressure off of people. They don't have to believe in anything. It's not about believing or not believing in something.
So maybe it's better to call this unidentified aerial phenomena. As you point out in the book, it's an alternative way of talking about it. It doesn't load the dice, and it doesn't have that pejorative sense that UFO has taken on because of countless movies and television series.
It's true, and it's interesting that a number of scientists have done that. They call it UAP, and they have adopted that term just because they do not want to, have the sort of association with all the sort of sensationalism and kind of woo-woo factor that comes along with the word UFOs. I personally don't think that's going to really solve the problem. I mean, but you'll notice in the chapters in the book, some of them, and one of them is the Major General from Belgium who we were talking about, have exclusively used the word UAP.
Yes.
But, it's still, UFO is so much part of our culture that I didn't want to call the book UAP. It just sounds a little too weird. I think we need to really get to the bottom of it.
I like your title. It is
I think we got to decide that we understand what UFO actually means and really get clear about that without having to change the language. And, that's what we're trying to do here.
And yet, you know what? When I took a look at the book, not only read it, but took a look at some of the extraordinary photographs that have been gathered for the book, I keep thinking of that one that was in the Cometa report, the white paper you referenced, taken by the Costa Rican government. It's an amazing photograph from 1971, a mapping aircraft shooting an object below it, and it's probably the clearest picture I have ever seen. This has been subjected to a lot of scientific analysis, and nobody knows what that was.
You're right. I mean, I absolutely love that picture. I think it's probably my favorite, Michael, of all the pictures, and there are some great ones. But part of the extraordinary quality of that picture is, you're right, its clarity, because since it was taken by a government mapping aircraft, they're using this incredibly huge negative.
Yeah.
So that because they wanted high resolution, because they were taking pictures of the ground from way up in the air. You could see the little trees in the picture,
It's
And it's
phenomenal.
also extraordinary because, as you said, they are looking down on the UFO. They're actually above it.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it may be the only picture that I know of worth anything. Usually we're looking up at these things.
Yeah.
This is so you can see the top
and
of
those
it.
blinding lights have to be dealt with. We're going to take a call
Right.
from Jean, calling us from Aylmer in Quebec on line 2. Jean, welcome to the program.
Hello, Michael. This is another great subject again. I haven't talked to you for a few months, but your guest, Ms. Kean, I'd like to clarify something. Does she believe these things exist or not, or
Leslie.
skeptic, or?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for asking. Absolutely, and if you look at my book, you will see that there is no question that there is a phenomenon, that these things exist.
Mm-hmm.
And there is so much documentation and so many high-level sources to make that statement that you cannot read this book and not get that's an absolute fact. In fact, at the end, I conclude, but it's based not just on my statements, but on 17 other people. We make the conclusion that it is a fact that there are phenomena in the sky that we cannot identify, we cannot explain what they are, where they're from. They repeat themselves decade after decade. They demonstrate extraordinary behaviors. And you cannot argue with the fact that that is a reality. But again, we do not know what they are. That's the important
Jean, it's like that Canadian airline pilot told me. I said, how did you know it wasn't man-made? And he said, nothing made on Earth flies at Mach 9 in formation and vectors 90 degrees. And he saw it, but he was afraid to talk about it.
Exactly. A question I wanted to ask, how fast is Mach 9 anyway?
Isn't Mach 1 the speed of sound or something?
Oh, my God.
Yeah, so
Very fast.
We're talking about something that's going 8,000 or 9,000 miles an hour.
Well, do you remember a couple of years ago when I talked to you about this, I had seen something over the years like stars or satellites flying around, obviously very fast, very high, and doing these extraordinary maneuvers and turning corners, several of them, in fact, up to a dozen. This happened in 1967 during the Six-Day War. I was 20 years old, and it happened again about 10 years ago, 15 years ago maybe, at our lake. And about 4 or 5 years ago, during the day, I was barbecuing. I remember telling you about this, where some disc, a bright disc, came by, and the sky was overcast. But I thought it was the actual the moon, because it was like a crescent. And it suddenly moved from the top of our house on the left, from the east, going across, all the way across to the west. And I lost it into the clouds. But I must have looked at it for 7 or 10 seconds.
What did it make you feel like?
Oh, I was stunned. I wanted to go and run. First, I thought for a second, I've got to get the camera. I've got to get my wife. She's in the kitchen. And then I thought, I can't leave this because it'll be gone.
You couldn't
and
tear
I
yourself
wanted
away
to
from
see
it.
as much of it as I could.
Yeah.
And then I told her as soon as it happened to confirm that it was someone else, and I told friends and neighbors about it. But there's no question in my mind these things exist. But, Ms. Kean, have you seen these yourself or anything at all? Or is it just through your investigation that...
It's actually, I've never seen one myself. And I it's funny. I would love to see one, but I also think it's probably better that I haven't in terms of the role I'm playing in all this. I mean, my role is to be an outside, objective, analytic kind of person and look at the data and talk to the sources and evaluate everything. And so if I had seen one, people might think, oh, she's just sort of one of these weirdos, and that colors her perception. And I'm also concerned about how it might impact me, because I know that some of the witnesses I've talked to have been very impacted by it. So I think it's better for my clarity of mind, actually, that I haven't. But I'll tell you, I'd certainly like to see one before the end of my life.
Leslie, just before you leave that subject, you talk about the impact on their lives. I've heard of the impact on people's careers who come forward, but you're talking about people who psychologically are changed forever because their universe will never be the same having seen what they've seen.
Absolutely. And, when you think about someone like James Pennison, who we talked about earlier, who actually touched one, I mean, these are not just, the sighting that you described with the pilot is extraordinary enough. But in this book, we're dealing with people that see them for much longer and much closer.
Yeah.
And they're young, and then they're told not to talk about it, and they have no support, and so some of the sightings are so intense and of such that it really, really has an impact on a person, and he's an example of somebody whose life was never the same after that.
Jean, I have to recommend the book to you. You've got to read this because I know you're interested in the subject. And one of the stories that you're going to read in the book, UFOs by Leslie Kean, is about Oscar Santa Maria Huertas. He is the only human being, in his own estimation, who believes that he has fired a weapon at a UFO and actually hit it. And when I read his personal account of what happened to him that day, I had no doubt. I don't know what they are, but he certainly wasn't firing at a weather balloon or a weather phenomena. It's an amazing account out of Peru. You have to read this book. We're going to take a short break here on Michael Harris Live, and when we come back, I'm going to talk to Leslie Kean about why it's so important in America to debunk UFO mythology and also put the question, does the government know more than it is letting on? Good afternoon, folks. Welcome back to the program. Our subject today has been UFOs. We've been talking about whether or not these phenomena exist. My personal view, for what it's worth, is that they obviously do. Do we know what they are? No, we don't. And that is one of the main platforms of Leslie Kean's wonderful book, UFOs. Generals, pilots, and government officials go on the record. Leslie, one of the things that occurred to me in reading the book was as long as most of the evidence, almost all of it, remains anecdotal, it's easy for people who think that people have been smoking the drapes who report having seen these things. But you have a chapter in your book where the former governor of Arizona, Fife Symington, talks about what he saw. And this man is not just the average observer, former Air Force officer. And he says in your book, I can say with certainty that what he saw on March 13th, 1997, during his second term as governor, was really not from this earth. Maybe it will take a few more people in public life like Fife Symington III and other people to make the system listen, because one of the recurring themes that you come up with is, it's a big business debunking UFO mythology in the United States from a government perspective.
Right. I mean, you're absolutely right, and I highly commend Fife Symington for having the courage to do what he's done. I mean, he actually didn't tell anyone for 10 years publicly that he had seen this object, which hundreds and hundreds of other people saw.
Yeah.
It just shows the stigma that's attached to it, and especially when you're in political office. I mean, he knew that if he talked about this, that he would have been ridiculed, and there was it was just would have been such an ugly situation that he decided not to. And you're right. I mean, in America, and I think it's not as bad in other countries as it is here, but when we talk about that a lot in the book, but there is a problem with this subject being completely taboo, that you're not taken seriously if you take the subject seriously.
Yeah.
So, and you're right, it takes people like Governor Symington, and the generals that have come forward. We also got John Callahan, who was very high level. He was head of investigations and accidents in the FAA, a very high level government official.
Yeah.
And they've come forward and they acknowledge that what they saw is like nothing else. Well, actually, Callahan didn't see it, but Symington did. I mean, the way he described it is it was something that defied logic and challenged my reality. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a really profound way of saying it. We were talking about how it affects people. He's a human being, but he happens to also have been a governor. So he's a very important part of the book, and he's somebody who's going to hopefully help us create change in Washington, because we very much want to change government policy so that we can get the proper investigation set up that we really need to figure this thing out.
One of the things about any new and spectacular insight or phenomena is that it's threatening to people. It's certainly threatening to the status quo. It's hard to imagine what Copernicus must have gone through when he figured out that we were rotating on an axis and we weren't the walking, talking center of the universe. We were just going around the sun. People got burned at the stake for that kind of thing. It's a little different now. Careers are ruined, reputations are questioned and put under a cloud. But I look at one of the documented cases that you present, which is the O'Hare incident, where something is seen by lots and lots of people, a lot of them professional pilots and sky watchers working at O'Hare Airport. And when this thing leaves, very well reported in the book by people who saw this, a kind of cookie-cutter effect right through the clouds, a hole in the clouds that allowed people on the ground to see blue sky on an overcast day. I don't know how you can just act as if nothing happened, but in that case, the Chicago Tribune, as you report, didn't even deal with this for 2 months.
Right, and and that was a problem. But I think on the other hand, the more positive way to spin that with the Chicago Tribune is that they took some time to investigate it, which is good. But they didn't receive the reports right away either. And I think the O'Hare case, Michael, is so important because it only happened a few years ago, and it's a perfect illustration of the problem that we have in terms of how our government handles these situations. Like you were saying, yes, I think there's a lot of fear about it, and I really like the analogy with Copernicus. I mean, I think it really holds true today. He didn't want to, he wanted the Earth to be, people wanted the Earth to be the center of the universe then. Well, now they want, the human race to be the only living race or whatever it is. They don't want to imagine that there's something out there more powerful than we are. It's really a chilling analogy. But if I could just go back to O'Hare for 1 second,
yeah,
what's
please.
Really important there, you described what happened beautifully. And again, the witnesses were all credible, high-level people that know something about aviation. And our government's response was to tell these people and to tell the public that what they saw was weather. And I mean, it's so really basically insulting to all the competent people that made reports and that saw what they saw. Mm-hmm. And they're perfectly capable of recognizing weather. They have instruments all over the airports that record the weather. And the really ridiculous thing about it is the weather that they were talking about, which was something called a hole punch cloud, a rare natural phenomenon, actually cannot exist unless the temperatures are below freezing. And the temperatures at O'Hare that day were well above freezing. So it was actually a physical impossibility for the explanation that they offered to have occurred. Yeah. This is as far as our government goes in paying any attention to this. And the other really chilling aspect of this is that not one witness from the O'Hare event was willing to put their name on the record because they were worried about their jobs.
Yeah.
What does that tell us?
That tells us that it's always dangerous to tell the truth, but it's most dangerous when it is most necessary to do so. Let me ask you this, Leslie. You want a special agency, a small agency, to properly, systematically, and scientifically study and work in cooperation on the UFO field with other countries. Do you think that is obtainable?
I really do think we have a good chance of having it happen, Michael, or, we would not have put all the energy behind it that we have put in the book from all these incredible authorities. So we're going to be working in Washington. I think we have a good shot at it, and, hopefully we're going to bring it about. But once we get the book out there, which we need to do first, we're going to be working in Washington. Feinstein is going to help us and others to try to bring that about. So time will tell, but we'll do the best we can.
Leslie Kean, a remarkable book. Congratulations on a job well done.
Thank you, and thank you so much for all your insightful comments, Michael.
Take care.
Appreciate it.
That is Leslie Kean speaking to us from Massachusetts about her new book, UFOs. Generals, pilots, and government officials go on the record. If you've ever had an interest in this subject, you must get a hold of this book. By far the best account of some of the famous UFO events that we know about, and a lot of things that have happened since 1976 that not many people do know about. Again, UFOs, Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials Go on the Record by Leslie Kean. That is the program for today. Thank you very much for listening and for calling in. That's why I do this each day.